Many countries in Europe seem to be on a path of self-destruction. They are totally abandoning the freedoms they were founded on in favor of globalist censorship and oppression. But JD Vance is here in Munich to call them out to their faces and stun the entire room. But before we get to these clips, don't forget to like and comment on this video so we can break through the algorithms. Here we go.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within. The retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not, and thank God they lost the Cold War. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person, but no. This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree. I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news. Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course it's gotten much higher since. And we know this situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's the result of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are with them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well. An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community. How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction? No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing opinions isn't election interference. Even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
So that, of course, is JD Vance putting the European Union on blast, essentially, right? He's comparing them to communists with their censorship of free speech, with them closing down churches, with them canceling elections, okay? These are not things that democracies, that republics, that a free people, free nations do to their citizens, right? Criminalizing silent prayer, prayer in your own home, or even thought crimes, okay? These are not things that a free people want. These are not things that true free countries do, right? This is exactly what socialists, communists, Marxists, Nazis, fascists do, okay? And that is what the European Union is basically turning itself into. And what we have to remember, of course, freedom of speech, freedom of expression are all American ideas. They're in our constitutions, and for some reason are conveniently left out of other constitutions all across Europe, right? They do not have the same rights and privileges that we have in this wonderful country. And I'm often thinking about Jordan Peterson, how, what has it been, 10 years ago now, when he came out and said, hey, we can't have this controlled speech at that point in Canada, talking about the whole transgender issue and pronouns, etc. He says, anytime you have controlled speech, it leads to problems, okay? It leads to censorship, and of course it leads to oppression. But everyone on the left was saying, oh, no, 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 we're just doing this because we want to be nice. We want to be polite. No one's going to go to jail. And now fast forward a few years, and everyone is getting charges. Everyone is getting fined, and everyone is going to jail who, of course, expresses their actual opinions, whether it's on social media or out in public, okay? This is stuff that is actually happening, and it is refreshing to see JD Vance call it out to their faces. And notice the lack of applause. Hey, Europe, you're really kind of oppressing your citizens, so maybe stop it, because that doesn't lead to strong democracies and strong countries. But Europe, they're like, that's what we do. That's what we do best. Our entire history is kingships and dictatorships, right? That's what we were built on, but not anymore. You can rise above all of that and, of course, restore the freedoms to your countries, to your citizens, even among all of these radical right parties that you don't approve of. And I also love how JD Vance mentions that, yes, even in our country, even here in the wonderful United States of America, the government was conspiring with big tech to censor everyone, right? They're out there saying, hey, we want to stop misinformation, one of those buzzwords from the communist era. So they got in bed with big tech to make it happen, which of course is egregious, because everything they were trying to censor was actually the truth, which of course is why you don't want the government involved in censorship, because who's determining what's true and what's false? It's the last people you want to be determining that. And of course, lastly, finishing off with mass migration. I remember going to Europe when I was younger. It was beautiful, right? I went through Germany, went through Austria, went through Italy. It was amazing. But now, of course, you watch videos of those same errors and the horrors that have been wrought on those societies, right? The garbage strewn around the streets, the rising crime in the cities, right? There is no way I would want to go on a tour of Europe nowadays, okay? And all of it is due to the rich culturalization of Europe, right? The mass immigration, the unchecked masses coming into these countries that are not there to assimilate, are not there to take on the mantle of being German or being French or being Italian, right? They are there to basically take over the countries and bring their own ideology with them, right? They're not in there to blend in and become Europeans. They are there to take over and cause havoc. And as JD Vance says, all of these attacks are basically the same. It's a young military-age male who is not vetted properly and is known by police, and of course he does a horrific act. And this happens over and over and over again. So it's time for Europe to wake up, because before too long, your entire national identities will be completely gone, will be completely erased. But that, of course, is what the people in Davos, what the globalists actually want. They don't want individual countries, each one with their own nationality, each one with their own national pride, each one with their own history. No, they want one big malaise of workers that, of course, will work for them, own nothing, and be happy. So thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like, share, comment, subscribe, and stay safe out there, people, because they're coming after you.